I went off on a creep who invited himself paddleboarding with me. Not sure whether I should feel bad. So I like to go paddleboarding by myself, especially during the summer months. West of my hometown, there's this remote lake just off the motorway, and past some picnic tables through a little stretch of forest, there's a lake hardly anybody knows about. Every few weeks I'll get the itch and carry a paddle and a board down to the water. Then I'll float around enjoying the sound of waves crashing against shore for hours on end. It's perfect, like a little slice of heaven carved out just for me. The only problem is, sometimes, other people ruin my plans. Take last week, as I lay flat on my stomach, mesmerized by the sunbeams sparkling across the surface of the water. This black speck appeared over on the lakeside. I got to my knees and cupped my hand against the setting sun. An intruder had stepped out of the underbrush. A real hulk of a guy. He shuffled over toward my clothes, which were in a crumbled heap on the embankment. Then his eyes crawled all over me. Even from a distance, I caught a bad vibe. All my valuables, phone, keys, wallet, were safely tucked away inside a waterproof pack attached to the back of the board. So I steered in circles for a while, watching the creep from the corner of my eye. He shouted something, although his voice didn't carry far enough to hear. I gave a half-assed wave, hoping he'd take the hint. But in my gut, I already knew what sort of bastard I was dealing with. I mean, those sorts of negative experiences were the whole reason I needed to go out there and clear my mind in the first place. Phone signal dropped the second you step into the forest, so calling for help wasn't an option. Aside from the beach, most of the lake was surrounded by steep, rocky slope. An Olympic climber could maybe scramble up using the exposed roots, but if I gave it a go, either my grip would give out or a dirt clod would become loose. Then I'd topple backwards onto a jagged rock and snap every bone in my body. The simple fact is there was only one way in or out. 5 minutes passed. 10, 20. Now and again fish leapt into the air, then a black shape caught my attention and circled my position before plunging into the depths. The lake was so deep only a trained diver could reach the bottom in a single breath. If I squinted, I could make out wriggly movement way down there. Like a tightly packed cluster of kelp, the thin tendrils swaying in the current. As it grew darker, I got chillier and chillier. The fatigue sure didn't help either. Soon the muscles in my arms were screaming. Meanwhile, the man just stood there. Staying out there all night seemed like a surefire way to catch pneumonia, and in his raincoat and hiking boots, the guy sure didn't look like he was in a hurry. Left with no other choice, I rode toward the bank. Not too close, but close enough to speak with him. Also, I know what you're thinking, but there was no point trying to run. Between the embankment and my car there was a maze of jagged nettles and crisscrossed branches with sharp ends. That's one hell of a gauntlet to run barefoot. The distance between me and the man shrunk to the length of a volleyball net. Even in the dying light, I could see hairs plastered against his forehead in sweaty tangles. I rode along on the back of a few limp waves. "Evening, darling," he yelled. I nodded. "Bit late for surfing, isn't it? You must be freezing in that tight swimsuit." I let myself drift around a bit. "Pretty peaceful here, huh? And it's one hell of a view," he said, studying my body. "You out here by yourself?" "No, my boyfriend's with me. He just went for a hike." "Is that right? You know you ought to be more careful about leaving your stuff behind. Some thief might have pinched it." The wind cranked up a notch. Along the coast, tree limbs scraped together roughly. "What's the matter? Don't you want to talk?" he asked, in a clipped way that made it clear he was pissed. "It's rude to ignore people. I was just trying to be nice. Why don't you come over and say hi?" I kept myself from getting dragged to shore with carefully timed dips of the paddle. "You think I'm some kind of pervert or something? You think I'm gonna hurt you?" "I didn't say that." "Then why not come over?" "Because I don't know you." That ugly blob of a face grinned, revealing all these rotten molars. "You're right. That was rude. I'm Desi, but you can call me DJ." He waited, then added, "Well, aren't you gonna tell me your name?" For a moment there was no sound except the wind. Against my wet skin, it cut right to the bone. "Aren't you coming in yet?" he called. "You don't want to catch a cold." "I'll take my chances." He spat at me, although the wad fell well short. A long runner of milky drool hung from the corner of his mouth, stretching out. He wiped it away. "Listen, I'm not leaving until you do the ladylike thing and introduce yourself. Just leave me alone." I'm a complete pacifist, so I'd given the idiot every opportunity to walk away. I really had. The last thing I wanted was for somebody to get hurt, believe me. His hand reached into the water and made sloshing waves. The board thrashed around, its left side dipping below the surface several times, and I had trouble staying upright. Desi said, "You know this is a dangerous place, right? Pretty little thing like you. Out here all alone? You might get grabbed by Sinking Susie." That caught my attention. Desi, delighted to finally have an audience, said, "Loads of folks, they set off for a nice little walk out here. They stumble across the lake. Think they'd like to take a little dip to cool off. Then, bam, Susie gets him." He waited to see whether I'd take the bait. I didn't, although he pressed on anyway. "See, Susie lived near here with her husband. He was a fisherman, so he'd be away for weeks. And Susie kept herself busy with these nature walks. She liked the fresh air, you know? But one day, she goes for a walk and hears giggling. And when she gets closer, she realizes it's her husband rolling around with another lady. Pretty little blonde thing, kinda like you. So Susie parks herself beside a tree and cries until the couple have their fun, and then she goes and stands by the water, all heartbroken. She doesn't want to live anymore. So she fills her pockets with rocks and walks out and lets herself sink. But that's not even the worst part. He paused for dramatic effect. Cause Susie drowns, but she doesn't die. She's cursed now, which means she's stuck lurking underwater, pulling any beautiful young thing who might have been her husband's lover down to a watery grave. So you see, you really should come in before dark, or you're gonna be having sushi for dinner. I was out of options. Until now, I'd played possum, hoping he'd lose interest, but he just kept pushing and pushing. As the frustration welled up inside me, mixing with the fatigue, something snapped, and I yelled, "What the fuck's your problem? Why can't you piss off and leave me alone?" Desi's eyes widened. Even still, he kept a lid on that temper. In a patronizing voice he said, "I wasn't trying to scare you. I just hate anything bad to happen is all." Another gust of wet air carried his foul breath toward me, overpowering the rich, leafy scent of pine. Gagging, I said, "Thanks, but I'd rather take my chances with Susie." "What did you eat for lunch? Dog shit?" Beneath Desi's coat, there was a large hunting knife strapped to his waist. He grabbed it from the holster and picked at his long, yellow fingernails. Then, he angled the edge of the blade so that the last slither of sunlight blinded me. "You know, if you're gonna be a bitch, maybe I should come over there and teach you some manners?" Shielding my eyes from the light, I said, "What are you gonna do? Breathe on me?" That sure set him off. Desi wrestled off his boots, hopping from leg to leg, then shed his jacket. It was never my intention to rile him up. I just wasn't thinking clearly. As he stepped into the water, his jaw clenched because of the biting cold. "Let's see how funny you were once I cut that fucking tongue out." I pushed as fast as I could, heart slamming against my chest. My attacker shuffled after me, submerged up to his waist, until he was far out enough to start swimming. No matter how hard my arms worked, I didn't seem to move very fast at all. Within seconds, Desi's strokes were so close they made frothing waves which splashed across my back. Every few seconds he lunged or swiped at the board, rocking it from side to side. I gritted my jaw tight and put everything into paddling. I swear I paddled as hard as I could in my exhausted state. Soon he got a hand on the board and held it in place. Using the wide end of the paddle, I cracked him across the top of the head. Furious, he tilted the board's tail sideways, hurling me overboard. The water hit worse than an ice bath. I must have swallowed half the lake in 3 giant gulps. When I resurfaced, sputtering, Desi's hand clamped tight around my neck from behind, and then he dragged me back in the direction of the embankment. "What's the matter?" he asked, his mouth pressed up against my left ear. "You've lost your sense of humor." As ripples coursed through the water, cutting back and forth, an enormous sense of relief washed over me. Through chattering teeth, I said, "You know, Desi, you had the Susie story all wrong. Is that right now?" he asked, still swimming. "You were right about her husband cheating. But Susie didn't kill herself. Her husband did it. Why? Was she a stupid bitch who couldn't take a compliment? She found them. Her husband, plus the girl. But her husband was furious he got caught. So he bashed her head in with a rock and dumped the body. Now there's an idea. But that's bad news for you," I gasped. "'Cause sinking Susie does haunt this place. I think it's about time you shut the foo." Desi stopped swimming and looked down at his legs. I did too. Wrapped around his ankle, there was a hand. A withered hand bleached white except for where the flesh had rotted away, exposing a deep, hectic red. Attached to it was a mummified figure, barely visible in the gloom. I could make out a bundle of barnacles covering a skull with a dented left side. In place of a nose and eyes and lips there were sunken caverns, the features eaten away by fish and rot long ago. It was a living corpse. It was the spirit of the lake. It was sinking Susie. While Desi floated there, terrified, I bit into the soft flesh of his hand. The second he let go, I pushed my feet into his chest and kicked away. Desi got reeled away, arms flailing in every direction, desperate for something, anything, to latch onto. Within seconds he'd zipped 50 meters, alternating between screaming and gurgling each time a fresh wave slapped him across the face. In the center of the lake, he spun round and round as if circling a drain before disappearing in a hissing column of foam. A steady stream of bubbles rose, and I floated there watching until the final one went pop. It was over. Desi had become another of the figures trapped down there, arms floating above his head, fingers swaying against the current. The latest link in a long chain of Susie's victims. I swam back to the embankment. Alone at long last, I toweled myself off. By the time I'd pulled on my sweater, My board and paddle had drifted over by pure chance, as if guided by invisible hands. Then I set off home, already planning my next trip. I swear, I only go out there for the peace and quiet. I'm as shocked as anybody when the trips turn violent.